Hello, everyone. Welcome back to On Purpose, the #1 health podcast in the world. Thank you so much for being a part of this community. Thank you for committing to your growth, to your self-development, taking out the valuable time of your lives to use it to become better, to grow, and to learn. You could be doing anything in the world right now, whether you're walking your dog, whether you're commuting, or whether you're at work and trying to learn more. Thank you for making this commitment to wisdom and to knowledge. And you know that my commitment to you on this podcast is to introduce you to the people, the ideas, the messages that can transform your work, life, and love. And today's guest is going to do just that. I'm so excited personally. This has been someone that I've been wanting to bring to you on the podcast for a long time. So I'm going to have to contain my excitement as well. But he's an American billionaire investor, hedge fund manager, and philanthropist, and the author of this incredible book called Principles. Now, I read this book when it first came out, and there were so many incredible insights of wisdom in there. And today I get to sit down with the one and only Ray Dalio. Ray, thank you so much for being here.
Whoa, like I don't deserve all that, but back at you. Thank you.
No, you're very kind. You're very kind. And I'm so grateful to have this opportunity with you because I truly believe that I'm so grateful. You said on the phone when we were speaking that there are these different stages of life. And I'm so grateful that you're at the stage of your life where you are sharing everything you've learned with all of us, because I think there's such a wealth of knowledge that we all have to gain from. So thank you from me and everyone else who's listening and watching for taking this next stage in your life.
Well, it's a treat and a responsibility, so I'm happy to do it. Thank you for helping me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So today I want to dive into life and work and many different areas that you speak about in your incredible book, Principles. And the first thing I want to dive into is these stages of life you speak about. Because when you said that to me on the phone the other day, they really resonated. Why don't you guide the audience through those different stages and phases and how you see them changing our life?
Well, I think to simplify, there are 3 stages in your life. The first stage in your life is when you're learning and you're dependent on others. Go to school, come out, graduate from school. It's very different from the second phase of your life where you're working, others are dependent on you, and you're trying to be successful. And that's what largely your audience is in that early stages.
Absolutely.
So I'm so excited to speak to them. And that whole arc is totally different. Like on the first arc, first part of the life, you pretty much follow a track. What schools, parents taking care of you, whatever it is. And then what decisions do you make? You hardly make any decisions. You make, okay, what college do you go to? If you go to college, then you go to the college and what major do you have? And then you come out to this world, the second stage, in which really the whole thing is wide open to you, particularly if you don't stay on a track. And you realize that there's no instruction manual and you can go anywhere and you could do anything. And then it's a very different phase. It's a more difficult phase. And that second phase then has an arc to it. And then somewhere in the vicinity of your last phase, that's the phase where you're free to live and free to die. And your preferences change. You change. Your relationships with others change. So that's the life arc that I'm referring to. And so I'm in the transition from the end of my second phase to the beginning of my third phase. And at that phase, I just want to pass along what I've learned to help people who are early in their second phase.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're so right that is the majority of people that are listening and watching right now. And for me, you brought something up really interesting there. One of the biggest things is we become paralyzed by choice and decisions. Because so much of that early phase is where things were decided for us, where choices were made for us. And I often feel we bring that mindset to the second phase where we're still looking for someone else to help tell us what to do and what decision to make and what's the right thing to do. How have you seen through your experiences, how have you dealt with choice and decision as that phase of life changes?
Well, I think, first of all, one has to know their nature. You might have to discover it. But your nature means, do you have a sense of adventure? Do you seek security? Are you an extrovert, an introvert? Those types of things. So personal discovery is important. I think that who you're with and where you are is more important than what you do. Because in the early phase of that second phase, it's total discovery. So it's experimentation. You know, you went to India for 3 years, right?
Yes.
And that but if you have that sense of adventure, to let go, you can discover. That's your opportunity. But discover yourself as well as to discover what the choices are like. And then as you move later into that, you'll feel the pulls. And to feel never trapped. We were talking just before we began that so many people say, I can't be that way because my job won't allow it, which is a silly concept because you have the freedom of those choices, even when you have constraining situations. So I think that's the life arc. Enjoy this wide open choice. You can be anywhere in the world. You can do almost anything. Let go, experiment, and then move on.
Absolutely. And did you feel that same freedom when you started as well? Or do you feel it's changed now? Do you think there's more access?
In my case, when I was 12, I got hooked on trading markets. So I loved that game. So I discovered it early. And then I wanted to, but I had this sense of adventure. I discovered when I went to work at a company that working at a company was not my thing. I got fired. I punched my boss. And I really then learned the freedom. I didn't have any idea that I was setting up a company. I just sort of said, I can do these things. Probably like you discovered, okay, I could do those things. And then one thing leads to another, and then, you build. And I always like the variety. So my nature is macro. So I like going all over the world, all different cultures, understanding how the world works. And so I found something that clicked through that experimentation.
Yeah,
but then there's ups and downs, right? Lots of ups and downs. So we need to talk about failure. How great failure is.
Yeah, let's do that, because I think when I'm hearing you say that, it's so refreshing. Because when I hear you saying, yeah, I had to figure it out and I was experimenting and testing and I didn't even know what I was building, I love hearing that, because that's what my experience so far has been too, as opposed to like a very rigid, strategic, not that there isn't strategy, of course there is, but something very rigid and planned. There is a lot of experimentation in that growth where failure is natural.
Yeah. My son in 2014 gave me a book, Joseph Campbell, and it was called Hero of a Thousand Faces, and it refers to the hero's journey. And this is like at the end of my experience, and I found that that's very, very true. And so there's this cycle. So a certain type of personality wants a taste for adventure. You go out and have the adventure. And then there are the ups and downs, and then you crash. You will have a failure. If you're adventurous and you're pushing the limits, you will have a failure. And that failure can be a transformative experience. I have an expression that pain plus reflection equals progress. So they call it the abyss. And change, the learning of humility, to maintain your aggressiveness, your audacity, and to simultaneously learn humility. And that happened to me. I was, you described it. I graduated from school. 2 years, I worked on Wall Street for 2 years. I got fired from my job. And 2 years later, I'm running my little company. Something like 7, 8 years after that, I made terrible mistakes in the markets. I crashed and I lost everything. And I was so broke that I had to borrow $4,000 from my dad to help pay for my family expenses. And it was publicly because I was on Wall Street Week and I made all those mistakes. And that was one of the most painful. Pain can be great because it changed my whole perspective to decision making. As I'm saying, it gave me the humility I needed to operate with my audacity. In other words, to simultaneously be bold and aggressive, and also to know that I could be careful. I learned that if you're doing risky things, anybody who does risky things, tightrope walk across buildings or whatever, it's that they also know how to deal with the risks well. So how to be bold and then to learn from the failures. And it changed my whole approach to failure. I began to think of failures like puzzles, that if I could solve the puzzle, I'd get a gem. And the puzzle was, what would I do differently in the future? And the gem I would get would be a principle of how I would deal with the future differently. So understanding that if you press the limits, you're going to fail, and it's okay. And life is a long journey. Failure has a tone to it that it sounds like it's an end. No, it's part of that process of learning and then making that great advance. But the humility combined with the audacity was helpful, because then I would go to try to find the smartest people I could find who disagreed with me, that independent thinking. And I would also know how to deal with my risks better. So I kept my upside without losing my downside. So that's failure and pain. If you look at the second order effects, if you make the most of them, they're the most valuable.
Absolutely. And I love that balance that you've just spoke about, or that bringing of the two together of humility and audacity. I've never heard it like that before. And I really value that, because I can see why humility is so powerful, but not that humility stops you from having that boldness and that courage. And almost like, how have you maintained that? Because I'm guessing that being at rock bottom, like having to borrow $4,000, can be very painful. And then when you're experimenting again and going on your next adventure, you've got to be okay with the fact that that could happen again? Or was that humility holding that back, having that happen again?
I think the tightrope walker crossing the building is the example, right?
Yes.
You fall, and you fall hard. Now, some people won't get on the tightrope again.
Yeah.
Some people will get on the tightrope again.
Yes.
And then they think, how do I do that? So how do I be bold and aggressive, and I pull it off? And it's the same way, right? You start to think, well, maybe I do this or that differently, and I practice more. It's that combination of the caution and practice that allows you to take it to the limits that you never would have been able to take it to before, right? I learned that. Once I learned that, everything changed, because I also would know how to take the hits. In other words, I don't mind getting banged, but I don't want to get knocked out of the game.
Yes.
So the willingness to get banged but not knocked out of the game is a big part of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, like a good fighter, right? Like you just were giving that analogy. For me, it's like sometimes a boxer or a fighter needs to know which punches to take in order to be able to drop a bigger punch. That's part of the game. And that's what you were saying about solving a puzzle. I love that analogy, because I think if we see everything as puzzles, that there's a way of figuring it out, right? You know there's an answer to a puzzle.
Yes, I think the key is to think of reality as you're given. Reality is reality. And think of it as working like a machine. There are cause-effect relationships that make the realities around you. Okay, now, if you go above yourself and you look at that, how does that machine work? And then how do I interact with that machine to get what I want? And you do that with an equanimity. Meditation also helped me a lot.
Yes.
I learned to meditate many years ago. If you have equanimity and you look at it above and you look at it with curiosity, and you say, oh, I must not be interacting well with my reality, and how do I change it, and how does it work? It's a very powerful way of approaching life.
Absolutely. And that definition of equanimity too, equanimity means to deal with good and bad.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to know, how have you celebrated and embraced successes in your life too? We just spoke about failure. I'm intrigued to know how someone like yourself deals with success.
Well, I think my thinking about success has evolved over a period of time. I thought about success. I today think about success differently. It's like the way I thought about it originally when you have this failure. I thought that it's like there's a jungle out there. I want to have the greatest life possible, but in order to be successful, I have to cross this dangerous jungle. Now, I could stay on the one side of the jungle and have a boring, safe life, but unless I deal with the risks and return go together, and it's like going into this jungle. So what would I choose? Would I choose to go into the jungle and cross the jungle and have the greatest life possible, but I might bad things might happen. And then I started to think when I went into that jungle, of course I had to cross the jungle, but I started to realize how to cross the jungle, most importantly with people who could see things differently than I could on the mission with me. And so, and we would protect each other in that jungle. And that's what it was like. So life is a lot like that. Who are you in the jungle with? And they might see things differently from you. And then you protect each other and you go through. And the thing that I discovered was that as I had these successes and failures, and much more successes than failures, I began to realize that I didn't care as much about the success as I cared about the journey. Okay. In other words, I didn't want to get out of the jungle. I didn't want to get to the other side, because it might be like, I don't know, climbing mountains or doing whatever. You realize there's a new peak and there's a new level of success, and it won't keep you happy. Okay. You don't sit there. You want to go on.
Yes.
And it is the ups and downs of that journey and the striving into becoming better that becomes the new definition of success. And so I started to see my life in this life arc way, with my preferences changing, because your preferences naturally change as one has kids and as they start to think. I mean, everybody that you're dealing with is going through a life arc. If you think about who are the people you love, what is your relationship with your parents? What are your relationship? Do you have children? They will have a life arc. And as you go through that life arc and you see those things changing, then you start to realize that operating consistent with that life arc and on that journey to evolve well, is what success is. It's not the money. It's like money loses its marginal utility very quickly, right? If you studies of happiness, there's a Harvard professor, many professors, I suppose, and they tell you the same thing in terms of studying happiness around the world. There's very little correlation between how much money you have and the level of happiness past the basic subsistence level. The element that there's the highest correlation with is an element of community, who you're with. So it's this meaningful work. Are you on a mission? And meaningful relationships through a life arc that evolves. So that's my definition of success is more like evolving well and contributing to evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. And those stand so true from my monk training too. So hearing them from you in a different context is so encouraging to hear. And for anyone who's watching or listening right now, please make sure that as Ray is speaking, you're visualizing his beautiful analogies. Because as I'm sitting here listening to you, I'm visualizing being in the forest. I'm visualizing being around people. I'm looking at the people in my life and seeing them as different aspects. And Ray paints such a beautiful picture as he speaks. So if you're listening right now, anytime he shares an analogy or a story, put yourself in that place, because it's going to help you go there deeper. And I think you do a brilliant job of that, Ray. And some of your videos I saw as well, the animations really bring that to life. So I can see them in my mind. Tell us about how you've been so careful about curating and constructing that community for yourself. You said that you found people in the woods who could see what you couldn't see, and you protected each other, which I love.
It was an evolutionary process, you know. So you're on a mission. You're on a mission.
Yes.
And you have people who are on the mission with you.
Yes.
And then you start to I started to find what do I want in those people, and what should the relationship be. And I first just picked people I liked. And I didn't realize how we see things differently, how we process things so differently. Our minds work so differently. And so when you start to see, let's say, there's a big picture thinker, there's a detail thinker. And we all become frustrated with the other person because they, like, the big picture says, why are you so hung up with those details? Let's go to the big picture. And the detail thinker thinks, you've got your head in the clouds. Yeah. You've got to come down to the nuts and bolts. And they're both right. And they start to realize that you need each other. You start to need the different ways of thinking. So I would convey that many people see things very differently. And how do you deal with those differences in seeing? They're disagreements. How do you deal with disagreements? My approach, and I learned, is whenever you're in a disagreement and you don't know how to deal with it well because it's not going well, pause, and then step above the disagreement together and then say, what are the protocols for us to disagree well? How should we do this thing? Always go to the higher level and think, how should you do that thing? And so you get protocols. I've developed these protocols. Like a protocol would be, like if we're not being able to communicate well together, a standard protocol is let's mutually agree on someone who will help moderate this conversation, and then we'll work things through. Or talking. How do I repeat what you're saying so that I'm conveying that I understand? And you start to develop those types of protocols and start to develop the appreciations of people seeing things differently. You discover also differences in values, differences in the most core principles of how people should be with each other. In my case, it was so essential that we're going to be completely, radically truthful and radically transparent with each other, right? And that was my discovery. And it's difficult, but I've also learned that many cases, the difficult things are only the first order consequences. They're difficult. The second order consequences is they're rewarding. And so by being able to have that radical truthfulness and that transparency to demonstrate that there's no spin was a discovery. So there's an evolutionary arc. I would say, in my culture, in my building an organization, a community that was beneficial, I'll describe it in one sentence.
Yes, please.
Long sentence. It's an idea meritocracy. In other words, it's a place where the best ideas win out regardless of hierarchy. So an idea meritocracy, and with the goal in which the goals are meaningful work and meaningful relationships. Meaningful work to be on a mission together. And meaningful relationships is an equal importance of that. And that produces this tough love. So I'll repeat it. I'm saying it too many. Words. So it's an idea meritocracy in which the goals are meaningful work and meaningful relationships through radical truthfulness and radical transparency. Anyway, that was my way. That's what worked for me.
That's incredible. And I guess all of these tools you were mentioning earlier about these protocols are to consistently realign everyone with that. Because as we start wearing away and you start seeing lack of transparency or lack of truthfulness or lack of meaning and mission, you're constantly having to realign everyone.
Right.